Hello, and welcome to another edition of our Reading the Signs podcast. I'm Rick Hinshaw. With me is Dr. Jim Dolan. Jim, this coming Friday, January 23rd, is the annual March for Life in Washington, D.C. Now, the march began in 1974 in response to the Roe v. Wade abortion ruling. There are those, including some in the Catholic Church, who criticize the church and the pro-life movement for being, they say, too singularly focused on abortion to the exclusion of other life issues. They suggest that the church and the pro-life movement are pro-birth, but not necessarily pro-life. Now, with regard to the church, that's never been the case, and the church has been clear. Even the late Cardinal Bernardin, author of the Seamless Garment Approach to Life Issues, stated that when a society allows abortion under the mantle of law, it necessarily undermines respect for all other human life. And my 50 or more years' experience with pro-life people have shown me that they are almost universally committed consistently to the protection of all human life. But they and the church see the abortion issue as a defining issue of our time, a kind of a foundational issue, because of the impact that this mass destruction, willful destruction of innocent human life has on respect for life in all instances. Now, you've devoted your life to working in the service area, serving those with different needs, and you've also volunteered in assisting people. And you once said to me, I don't know if you remember this, that you try to approach all issues first and foremost from the standpoint of how do they impact on respect for human life. Yet you also have seen abortion as a defining issue, one that must be addressed if we're going to be able to address other issues of life and justice. So can you elaborate on that?
Oh, thank you again, Rick, for kicking off the show. It's great to be with you again. Let's look at the root causes of abortion, and I'd like to begin with that approach as a way to answer your question and the way you kicked off the show. Back in the 1960s, when I was in school, in high school and just beginning college, actually I didn't begin college until 1972, but it was during the 1960s in response to the baby boom when many people started talking about concern about overpopulation. And it was after the wrap-up of the 1960s is, of course, when Roe v. Wade was written into law by the Supreme Court in 1973. What was the context for abortion being legalized and support for abortion developing? The context was this fear of overpopulation, that somehow the growth of the human population was going to overtake humanity and create a risk to humanity. It was really within that mental context that abortion found favorability. Now let's contrast that with a thinking that would be along the lines of what would society feel about abortion if their concern was that we are underpopulated. Well, I could assure you, if the fear was that we didn't have enough people to make the world run smoothly, abortion would be seen as irrational. It would be seen as self-destructive, in fact. So let's begin by recognizing, we all have to begin by recognizing that the context in which abortion found favorability was in the context that there was fear of overpopulation. So let's jump off from that point, Rick, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, I'd like to pick up on what you just said, because one of the results of that really overreaction to almost apocalyptic vision of overpopulation is that we are now in a crisis of depopulation. And the massive abortion culture in the United States and around the world has been a big part of that, as well as other, very coercive government policies to reduce the population. And we now have a situation, Pope Francis a number of years ago pointed out that in Italy, their social services programs were in jeopardy because there were not enough people of working age contributing into the government's base for social programs to support all those who needed their programs. Here in the United States, the late Catholic theologian, philosopher, and economist Michael Novak pointed out that when Social Security was first introduced by President Franklin Roosevelt, the formula was that there would be 7 people working and contributing into the system for every one person receiving benefits. Novak wrote, and this was before he died, probably back around 2010, 2012, that we were down to, I think it was 2.5 people working for every person receiving Social Security benefits. And that's only growing worse as our baby boomer generation moves into retirement, because each successive generation has produced less people per family than the baby boom generation did. And this is a crisis going on all over the world, and it's really impacting on economies as well as social services programs around the world. China, which pursued a brutal, drastic one-child policy per family, including forced abortions for those families that conceived a child when they already had one child, and they are now concerned about the depopulation occurring there to the point that they're now trying to put forward a 3-person family policy. But it's a lot harder to get people to become pregnant than it is to abort their babies. So that's that's not working as easily. So one of the problems here is you have a situation, you have a concern. People are looking at population growth, and are we going to be able to feed and house a growing population? But then you get into these apocalyptic visions, the worst case scenario, and we respond with these drastic approaches. And as you point out with abortion, the drastic approach justifying the mass killing of innocent human lives, supposedly to protect against overpopulation. We have created the opposite problem now, while in the meantime, across the world, we wiped out probably hundreds of millions of innocent babies who would have been contributing members, most of them, to our society. So part of what's called for here is not jumping to these drastic solutions that so often destroy the potential victims of a problem rather than the causes of the problem. And yours is a very good example with overpopulation, but we can get into so many other areas where abortion was going to be a solution to poverty, to child abuse, to those with disabilities. And these are solutions that, again, attack the victims of those problems of human suffering, not the causes of them.
So you're right, Rick. When humans are when we are encountering a problem, we're always going to be challenged with either a destructive approach to problem solving or a life-affirming approach to problem solving. Now, here's what happened, and it's kind of interesting, that people who are supporters of abortion don't really want to recognize or acknowledge or accept that their movement occurred within this context of fear of overpopulation. What happens when there's a fear of overpopulation? What happens is that subpopulations get targeted for diminishment. So what has happened? What kind of tricks have people played with themselves in terms of justifying abortion? What they have done is, instead of acknowledging that it was in response to overpopulation and a unfortunate natural outgrowth of that focus is a movement toward eugenics, what they have done is that they couch it as, or they describe it as, a civil right. So by describing abortion as a woman's right, civil right, human right, this makes them feel okay with themselves that they have actually taken a destructive path to addressing a life problem. Now, probably from prior shows, sometimes I blame this stuff on the devil, and it is a neat trick by the devil to be able to convince people that destruction, that a killing approach to problem solving is really a good thing. That's a neat trick by the devil. And so here's from, as you've pointed out before, Rick, I have a long history in the mental health field as a practitioner. And when we as practitioners are working with a client, and we understand that there's three levels of mental awareness. There's consciousness or awareness, there's preconscious, and then there's the unconscious. Now, oftentimes people who have mental health problems are unable or are unwilling to allow into consciousness or awareness what we refer to as troubling mental material, especially when it's objective truth or objective reality. They will block that kind of information because they find it unsettling. They're not able to incorporate into themselves those truths for certain psychological reasons. And it's the goal of a practitioner to strengthen the client to the point that they can tolerate objective truth and objective reality. And what happens when the person can do that is that because humans are so adaptable, the person will be able to incorporate the truth, will be able to incorporate that objective reality. And what they will do is they will make positive adaptations. They will make positive attitudinal and behavioral changes. But if we continue to describe the destruction, the killing that takes place with abortion and use some euphemisms as if it's a civil right, we're going to remain stuck in using destructive approaches to problem solving. And we, in a prior show, talked about how the same thing is happening with assisted suicide.
Yes, and let me pick up on that. I had an op-ed in Newsday probably about a year ago now on excluding the unborn from the abortion debate. And the idea was, when you and I first got involved in pro-life back in the 70s, there was still an effort by some to deny the objective reality that there was a living child in the womb whose life was being taken. But that, of course, can no longer be denied. All of the advances in science and medicine, and the unborn through the miracle of things like ultrasound has become an advocate, a witness to his or her own living existence. We can see them living and growing. But that has got to be, if not denied, ruled outside of the equation of the abortion discussion. So if you said it's been presented as a woman's right, and that's the end of discussion. The idea of another human being also with rights is not even to be part of the equation. And it reaches the point, Jim, this is something I've known for years, but I noticed that, I'm sitting watching TV the other night and they're showing these, horrible, it's a commercial about animal abuse. And they're showing these horrific pictures of animals obviously abused and suffering and looking for contributions to. And we see, newspapers, the New York Post will run the most gruesome crime photos, never miss it. And in all kinds of ways, we'll see these horrific depictions of suffering, human suffering, animal suffering. And the reaction is supposed to be, and generally is, isn't it terrible that that's happening? But none of these media would allow any depictions of the images of an aborted baby, especially late-term aborted babies, as we're finding happening more and more with some of these abortion profiteers. And whenever those are shown by pro-life people, the reaction is not from the media or from the influence makers in society. It's not, isn't it terrible that that's happening? It's, isn't it terrible that they're showing this stuff? And that's a way of suppressing the reality that abortion kills violently and painfully a living human being. And that gets to what you're saying. It's this idea of denying objective reality so that we don't have to face what it is we're advocating and what it is our culture is doing.
Another great point, or a series of great points there, Rick. So I'd like to talk a little bit further about how this concern about overpopulation has led to the practice of eugenics. And what has happened, talking again about how people trick themselves or they block from reality, block from consciousness, objective reality and truth. Sticking with the concept of eugenics, so one of the founders, or the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, is certainly well known for her eugenics tendencies, and she was clear that she felt that the subpopulations to be targeted were what she referred to as the unfit, And she has certainly alluded to the black population as a population that should be limited in size. So, of course, abortion supporters will vehemently argue against that kind of train of thought. But let's look at the current reality. If they don't want to agree that it all emanated from that kind of thinking, in current reality, this is what's happening. The black population, the black people make up 14% of the United States population. 14%. Do you know what percentage of abortions are what percentage of abortions are done to unborn black children? 40%. So through practice, it has become a eugenics approach that is causing a diminishment of the black population. Now, what's ironic about the whole thing is that black people, black leaders feel that they don't have enough of a role, they don't have enough impact in determining public policy. But the estimate is that between 20 to 25 million blacks have been aborted since Roe v. Wade. 20 to 25 million. What would be the strength, what would be the political influence of the black population if we added another 20 to 25 million blacks to the United States population?
Yeah, and one of the problems, I think in the black community as well as in the Catholic community and other Christian communities, those who are strong in their religious faith, strong believers and practitioners, tend to be very pro-life, and many of the black churches are outspokenly pro-life. But what you have is, this is very interesting because I think professional women, which more and more women are these days, which is fine. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing that women finally are able to pursue all of their talents, and their ambitions. But professional women tend to be, by and large, pro-abortion, if not having abortions themselves, believing very much in the right to abortion. And I think it's interesting because when we talked about assisted suicide a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about several Democratic legislators from Long Island, women of color, who worried about those vulnerable populations being the targets for assisted suicide, and yet all of those women legislators are very supportive of legal abortion. What it becomes is not concern, as you brought up, about really eugenics against minority populations, but a woman's right, a woman's individual right to have an abortion. But there is something deeper. That is the selling point, and they picked up on it particularly in the 1980s with the advent of President Ronald Reagan and a more conservative government talking about individual freedom. And they applied it to abortion, but the point is there, again, you have another human life involved, so it's much more complex than that. But the idea that that's how we will get people to support abortion, presenting it as a woman's right, rather than back in the 70s where so much of it was as a solution to various social problems and a response to overpopulation. But yes, I think this idea with eugenics, yes, it was all the rage back in the early part of the 20th century. You mentioned Margaret Sanger, of course. Others, Theodore Roosevelt believed in, he had 6 children. He believed in strong, large families, but not among poorer populations. I don't know how much he focused on racial matters, but those who are poorer, who are less productive, maybe less intelligent, should not be encouraged to reproduce. And it was very popular in very influential circles. Of course, with the advent of Hitler and Nazism, and clearly the eugenics behind a lot of his slaughter, he attacked he did genocide against the Jewish population, but he attacked those with disabilities, those who were homosexual, and he attacked various populations that he considered so-called useless eaters, who were a drain and a burden on society. So then it became discredited to talk openly about targeting certain groups for limiting their population, but it's still been the undercurrent of the population control movement and of the abortion culture in our country. And it's something that has to be talked about, but it's something that uh, it's considered verboten to talk about, and but it's all part of the entire abortion mentality.
Well, thank you, Rick, for that point. And uh, picking up further, though, I do want to finish my thought related to uh, abortion and the black community. It's very interesting that in 1977, Reverend Jesse Jackson was very pro-life. In fact, he made some very profound comments in opposition of abortion. And what happened is that he uh, ran for president in 1984, and he felt the need to change his opinion on the matter because of his ambitions. But I have to make the further point that it's not necessarily a Republican versus a Democrat issue. One of the drivers behind the concern about overpopulation, and one of the drivers of the idea that certain populations should be limited in size, was Richard Nixon. So we can't necessarily say that it's only a Democrat issue or a Republican issue. This is a issue that cuts across all political parties, is this unwarranted fear of overpopulation and how that has taken us in this direction of killing as a solution.
If I could just a quick point there, because yes, Richard Nixon, that's very interesting because he pulled together this population commission. Nelson Rockefeller was on it, so was Jesse Jackson. And that's when Jesse Jackson said abortion literally kills the conscience and results in a moral aloofness. Now, when the Population Commission came out with their recommendations, including legal abortion, Nixon pointedly disagreed with that part of the commission's report. But what he didn't understand is, again, by encouraging this apocalyptic, desperate concern about overpopulation, he was encouraging such drastic measures as abortion, which he said he opposed. Whether that was politically calculated or whether he really did oppose it, the point was he was still opening the door to it. And yes, with Jesse Jackson, as you said, when he ran for president in the Democratic primaries, he felt that votes he was going to get, he might lose some of them if he continued being a pro-life voice. But
So thanks for that contribution to that point, Rick. So let's also talk about abortion from the concept of it affecting the notion of innocent life. The unborn has no reason to be blamed for any of life's problems. They're not a factor in anything that's gone wrong in society, but they are targeted for destruction. There is a war against the unborn. Now, why do I say that there's a war against the unborn? And you kind of touched on it a little bit ago, Rick, that due to the breakthroughs in technologies that enable us to see what's happening with the unborn child through sonograms and so forth, the notion that this is a human life, everyone now has to accept that. In fact, there isn't a scientist. It's difficult to find a scientist who disagrees with the idea that human life starts at conception. It's generally understood and accepted that this is a biological fact. So what do people have to do with that? Again, they have to switch it from the thinking from it being a destructive approach to problem solving to it being a civil right. But what they have done by accepting the fact that this is, okay, maybe it is a human life, what does that mean? They're justifying the killing of human life. What does that mean? They have launched the war against the unborn. So they've launched a war. They've launched the war against innocent human life, and throughout history, innocent human life has always been understood as warranting protection to all extents.
absolutely, and Jim, that's I've and we're not going to be able to get into all this today, but we'll probably pick it up in future things. One of the things I've kind of done over the years is break down these life issues or life and justice issues into different categories. And the first category is where the government is involved in the taking of human life. And within that, there are two distinct categories where the government is involved in deliberately taking innocent human life. And front and center on that is abortion. The government has legalized it. Even with the overturning now of Roe v. Wade, we've had legalized abortion for over 50 years. It's still legal in most states, even states that have tried to restrict it, the state courts in a lot of cases striking it down. So it's become a part of American life, legal abortion. And the government in many states is involved in paying for abortions, forcing taxpayers to pay for other people's abortions. With different administrations, they've exported abortion to other countries as economic policy, supposedly helping developing nations to improve their economy by promoting abortion in those countries. So this is a case, abortion, the most glaring case where our government is involved in the deliberate destruction of millions of innocent human lives. Now we're into issues like euthanasia and assisted suicide. A little bit different, some will say, because with assisted suicide, they argue, well, the person really wants to die. As we talked about previously, that's not always the case. There's a lot of pressures involved. But that's another issue where innocent human life is now vulnerable at the hands of the government. Then there are issues like the death penalty and war, where the government does get involved in the taking of life, not with the intention of taking innocent life, although obviously we know there are times when the death penalty, a mistake is made, an innocent person is executed. In war, the church teaches that one of the qualifications in just war teaching is that it is not allowed to deliberately attack civilian populations, but it happens. And whether deliberately or not, innocent lives are always lost in war. But there's a distinction, and we can talk about, again, we don't really have time today, but we'll talk about what the church has to say about issues like that. Then there are issues where the government is called upon to protect human life from other threats, violent crime and murder, deaths by substance abuse, terrorism, other forms of criminal activity that jeopardize human lives. And then there are issues that are not, the direct taking of human life, but issues of justice and concern for human suffering that we're also called as Catholics to respond in life-affirming ways. And these are all things we'll have to get into, but again, foundationally, as I've said before, the church is not pro-life because she is against abortion. She is against abortion because the church is committed to the sanctity of every human life created in the image of God. And the church has things to say about all of these issues, but the church understands that we begin with the protection of the most innocent, most defenseless of human lives, because if we justify killing them, how do we speak up for protection of any other human life along the whole spectrum?
Excuse me. You're touching, Rick, on the concept of the need to create a culture of life. Within a culture of life, all human life, beginning at conception to natural death, is valued, seen as a gift from God, and protected. But how do we operationalize the concept of a culture of life? What does a culture of life look like? And that's where there is overlap between the pro-life point of view, the right to life point of view, and those who support abortion, that there need to be societal supports that help people to not want to go down that destructive path because they do feel so protected, they do feel so cared for, they do feel that their resources and supports are in society or immediately available to them to enable them to deal with whatever life challenge comes their way. But before talking about how a broader society should operationalize the concept of a culture of life, I want to bring it back to the more intimate setting, which is the family, and which is the role of the man in this whole process. As I touched on in a prior show, in the vast majority of cases that a woman has an abortion, it's because the father has disavowed any involvement in the fact that this woman who he impregnated is dealing with the issue of being pregnant, that they are abandoning the woman, and that to a large extent is a reason why she is looking to abortion as a way of addressing her life problem. 87% of abortions happen to women who are unmarried. Again, the man has a, this is so we talk about this as a woman's right, or it tries to be described as a woman's right. But you know who's really benefiting more than anybody, even more than the woman, is the man. He's being enabled to take advantage of this liberalization of our attitudes towards sexuality, and now he doesn't have to feel responsible for anything that relates to the sexual activity he had with the woman.
If I could interject on that, Jim, yeah, because that's very true. The other side of that is when the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade basically excluded the father from any role in the abortion decision, who did that empower? Women say it empowered them, but it empowered exactly who you're talking about, that self-centered, hedonistic male who uses women for his pleasure, but who has no desire to accept any responsibility for his child and the mother of his child should he impregnate a woman. The man who helps conceive a child out of wedlock, but wants to take responsibility for his child, wants to take responsibility for the mother of his child, he is told, you have nothing to say about it. If she wants an abortion, you're totally out of the picture. So the Supreme Court empowered that self-centered male who always wants to exploit women for his own pleasure, and has excluded and disempowered that man who wants to accept his responsibilities and care for the child he's created and the mother of that child.
You know, that is creating a movement within the pro-life cause to support men who were trying to take responsibility, although they were unmarried or even married, they're trying to take responsibility for the fact that the woman in their life is pregnant, and trying to help the woman through the pregnancy, and to, of course, save their unborn child in the process. I don't know if we have enough time to talk about another topic, but one thing I'd like to talk about maybe in a follow-up show, Rick, is how men are failing women, how men are not living up to their role that they are, I think, supposed to, by God's design, to perform in society. I'd like to, when I was providing psychotherapy to men on a more frequent basis, I used to say to men, why do you think God came to earth in the form of a man? Why did he come in the form of a man? Women already have a role as co-creators with God, and they already have a role as nurturers of life. But men need a role. God came to earth in the form of a man to give us a role. We should be protectors. We should be tone setters. We should be setting a moral course for our family and for society, and we're fumbling the ball entirely. God came to earth in the form of a man because he anticipated that possibility.
Well, and that is a topic for another show. On the other side of that, again, though, is how men are being, I don't know if the word's emasculated or frozen out of certain things when they do want to take on their responsibilities. There really has been, in a sense, a war against men in our country, but those men who are self-centered, hedonistic, self-serving, they're happy not to have their responsibilities. So I guess we're out of time today, but this has been a great discussion. I hope you'll join us again in a couple of weeks when we'll come back and talk about another current topic. For now, please, thinking about the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the March for Life next week, and all of the continued destruction of preborn human life, please remember the unborn and our country and a culture of life in your prayers. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.